I'd like to thank you, Gavin, very, very much for helping me. I accidentally deleted the first part of the share. So thanks for joining me for just a quick, brief update. I've got the second part of the share. So we're on 36b3. And what we discussed is the fact that basically Shmuel said to Rabbi Yehuda, sharp one, follow me and see the first part of the Mishnah of Rabbi Meir as falling in line with Rabbi Yishmael, and see the second part of the Mishnah by Rabbi Shimon as falling in line with Rabbi Akiva, and don't try and work both sides of the Mishnah under one Tana. This Tana is indeed like the 15th daf in that it has two separate Tanaim for the respective sections. So the Gemara then follows on and supports Shmuel's assertion in page 36b3. It says, it also states in regard to the dispute of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yochanan said, there is a practical difference between them. Between what? Between Rabbi Meir's first part of the Mishnah and Rabbi Shimon's second part of the Mishnah, in a case where the victim consecrated the ox. According to Rabbi Meir, it is not consecrated, for the victim is not a partner in the animal, and thus cannot render it sacred. According to Rabbi Shimon, it's partially consecrated, for the victim as a partner in the animal can render his portion sacred. So we can see from Rav Yochanan's statement that the dispute between the first part of the Mishnah with Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon follows the dispute between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Accordingly, the Mishnah's first clause of Rabbi Meir accords with Rabbi Yishmael, and the second clause of Rabbi Shimon accords with Rabbi Akiva. Okay, so the Gemara now introduces a new discussion where it will connect to our Mishnah. We have learned in the Mishnah in 90a that one who delivers a blow to the ear of his fellow pays him a selah to compensate for his humiliation. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav Yossi Aglili, he pays him a manna. So what we're saying is the dispute is on the selah portion. So before we get to there are 5 payments that are due. There's nezek shalom for when a Jew hits another Jew, which is the actual damage, which includes what losses of what they would have earned in their previous capacity, to the degree where the hearing aided them in that job, and now they can't do that job anymore, and they have to do another job. So that's actually a nezek shalom. Then you've got, obviously, medical expenses. You've got convalescing, which means the recovery time, but the convalescing time is paid at the rate of what he would earn at his new job. So if, for example, he was a concert pianist before where he needed his ear, and now he can only look after rabbits at a zoo because he doesn't have any other skill, that weekly wage as a rabbit carer is what you're paying in terms of convalescing. The damages that you pay with his job loss, as well as actual damages, are part of nezek shalom. Now, the humiliation aspect is when a Jew intends to hurt another Jew. So even if that Jew isn't humiliated, the fact that a Jew intends to hurt another Jew is regarded as humiliation. So that is what we're talking about, that for the humiliation aspect, he's paid a seller. All the other payments are worked out exactly. Now, there is an opinion by the Ramah that the seller includes both pain and humiliation as one fee because they're intangibles. We already discussed in the daf that anything regarding medical expenses or actual damages or the amount of time they need off to heal are calculable amounts, whereas pain is abstract. Humiliation isn't abstract. What's humiliating to one person is not as humiliating to somebody in a different position. So, for example, the Gemara does discern what happens if you humiliate a public figure on live television compared to somebody that is just collecting the trash as a municipal employee. The one can ruin a career. The other one isn't nice, but it's not nearly the same level of damages. So there's a discussion here between Rav Tuvia Bar Masna, and he sent a legal case to be judged before Rav Yosef. And Rav Tuvia posed the following question to Rav Yosef. He said, did the Mishnah teach that one must pay a Tyrian seller, which is equivalent to 4 zuz, or did the Mishnah teach that one must pay a provincial seller equivalent to only half a zuz? So again, the case we're dealing with here is if a Jew punched another Jew on the ear, is the humiliation fee aspect equivalent to 4 zuzim? In other words, a Tyrian seller, which is a national currency, or a provincial seller, which is equivalent to half a zuz, which is 1/8 the amount. The reason the amounts differ is the provincial currency, which is a kesef badina, were minted from silver alloy, whereas a national currency, the Tyrian currency, were coins of pure silver. So what happened was Rav Yosef said to him, look, we learned the answer to this in our particular Mishnah. What Mishnah? In the 36th Mishnah of Bava Kamma, not in the legal case of Bava Kamma when it talks about the deaf person in the 90th daf. In terms of what the currency is worth, we learn that in the 36th daf. And how does this relate to our Mishnah? The owner of the last ox gored takes a manna, and the one preceding him takes 50 zuz. So before I go through that whole thing, I'm going to just share my screen with you, Gavin, and then you're going to see what it is that I'm in fact talking about. If you can just give me one moment. I'm going to go as quickly as I can. Just give me a second. Okay. Just going to share my screen with Gavin. Sorry, Gav. Give me 1 sec. I much appreciate this. And I really appreciate your time. You're a tzaddik. Really appreciate it. All right. Share the screen. So if we share the screen, the reason I'm sharing the screen is those that might not be familiar. So what is it referring to in our daf? It's saying, look, here it's talking about currency, not the case of Rabbi Meir in the first part of the Mishnah, but Rabbi Shimon, the second part of the Mishnah. It's saying, look, you have the original case where before an ox scores 4 or 5 other victims, you have the owner of the ox. And he didn't look after his ox and he damaged the first victim. The attacking ox is worth 200 zuz. And the ox that is dead is worth 200 zuz. And the carcass is worth nothing, as it says in the Mishnah. So what happens is I take, as the victim, for my 200 zuz ox, because it's a tam effect, and it's half payment damages from the body of the attacking animal, the victim is only entitled to 100 zuz on a 200 zuz claim, because it's a tame ox. So the 100 zuz is given to the first victim, and the original owner of the attacking ox gets his 100 zuz change on the 200 zuz ox. So now they're 50% partners each. Now, there's an obligation as partners that both of them, because they're shareholders, have to look after the animal. So it doesn't matter whose custody the animal is in, according to Rabbi Akiva. They're both responsible for looking after the animal. So if it gores a second victim, then they need to share in the damages that they pay to the second victim. Again, the case unfolds always the same with Rabbi Shimon to prove the point. Attacking ox is still the 200 zuz ox, and the victim has a 200 zuz animal that's dead. It's a tame ox. It's a tam offense, 100 zuz. So the second victim is damaged by 200 zuz, is owed 100 zuz. So the first victim and the original owner both have to come up with that 100 zuz in total. So each one takes 50 zuz and gives it to the second victim. So now the second victim is a 50% partner, and the first victim is a 25% partner, and the original owner is a 25% owner. Okay? So what happens is if the ox scores again, and there is a third victim, The third victim, again, has a 200 zuz dead ox. He's owed 100 zuz because it's a tame ox that attacked his. And in that particular case, the shareholding works as follows. The second victim is a 50% shareholder. So then he owes him, how much does he owe him, Gavin, as a 50% shareholder? Yes, he owes him 25 zuz, yes. Then the first and second victim are, what do you call it, 25% shareholders each, so they owe 12.5 each. And
12.5, yeah.
12.5 and so on and so forth. But in this particular mission, it should be noted that it only goes up to the principle of showing 25 zuz apiece, meaning once it showed the first case that there's shared partnership, and as it gets damaged down the line, as their shares diminish, they pay until there's nothing left of the attacking ox in terms of value. You don't have to keep driving home the point. So in that particular case, it's saying we get our currency from our particular mission in the Daf in 98. So how does this work? Very straightforwardly, is that just give me a sec. Rav Yosef develops his proof. He said, if it should enter your mind that the Mishnah generally propounds teaching concerning the provincial selah, then let us go on and teach the further distinctions that accrue when the ox goes yet again up until the point at which the shares of the owner and the first victim are reduced to 12 dinar and a provincial selah, which is 12.5 dinarim, because we said a provincial selah is worth half a dinar. And the very fact that the Mishnah refrained from doing so demonstrates that the Tanaim of the Mishnah do not generally deal with the denominations of the provincial selah. Perforce, when the Mishnah obligates one who strikes another on the ear to pay selah, it refers to the more valuable Tyrian selah. So in plain English, what he's saying is, I'm using this Mishnah, Rav Yosef is using our Mishnah as a proof to say the very fact that it's not talking about 12.5 dinarim and it only goes up to 25 dinars means that it's not talking about a provincial seller. It's talking about the higher value Tyrian seller. Otherwise, it would discuss a provincial seller for the half dinarim for the further refracted damage. But the Gemara's got a problem with that. And the reason why Rav Yosef's proof is rejected is because Rav Tuvia bar Masna said to Rav Yosef, must the Tana of the Mishnah go on enumerating cases like a peddler counting out coins? Perhaps the Mishnah would deal with provincial currency where necessary. Here, however, it's not necessary to do so, for the Mishnah has already demonstrated the division of damages for the first 3 times the ox gores, and we can extrapolate from there all further gorings. So there's nothing to be gained by teaching the law of yet a fourth goring. So our Mishnah doesn't constitute a proof that the Tanaim speak of a seller. They invariably mean a Tyrian seller either. So what it's saying is neither one of them is a proof. Rav Yosef can't have a proof and say it's talking about a provincial seller because of this half a denarim, simply because you don't have to go and teaching the point once you've already understood the mathematics. So what's the bottom line? How do we hold? Is it a Tyrian seller or is it a provincial seller? So the Gemara says, well, what's the conclusion of the matter? And the bottom line is that for anything that is mentioned in the Torah in terms of damages actions, that has to do in Tyrian currency, national currency of pure silver. Whereas if it's rabbinic in nature to Rabbanan, it is a silver alloy, and then it can be in provincial currency. So, for example, in Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 29, the Torah speaks of a 50 shekel or cellophane that's levied upon a rapist or a seducer. In Shmot, it talks about a 30 shekel fine levied upon an owner that kills a servant. In Deuteronomy, 100 shekel fine for a guy who defames his wife. We actually don't know what sort of currency our Mishnah is dealing with. That's the whole link. Okay, so we have learned the answer to this in our Mishnah, which states the owner of the last ox that gored takes a manna, and the one preceding him takes 50 zuz. And the first two, the owner of the tum ox and the first victim, takes a dinar of gold, 25 zuz apiece. Okay, so what we're talking about is the case with Rabbi Shimon, when he supports the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. And it says, look, Gavin is the original owner of the ox, right? He damages me as the first victim. And in that particular case, then Gavin and I are partners in the ox 50-50 because he gives me 100 zuz, Gavin keeps 100 zuz. Then, for whatever reason, whether it's my fault or Gavin's fault, we're not talking about here issues of custodians and seizing the ox, not according to Rabbi Akiva. It doesn't matter if I was at fault or Gavin, but if the ox that we should both be looking after because we're partners damages Kevin as a second victim, now Gavin and I, from 100 zuz, only have 50 zuz remaining because we have to each share our cost and give Kevin as the second victim 50 zuz each. Then Kevin as a second victim is a 50% shareholder in that 100 zuz ox, and Gavin and I are 25% shareholders each. So what happens is if the ox then damages the third victim being Arthur, then we're always talking about a case with Rav Shimon, according to Rabbi Akiva, when the attacking ox is worth 200 zuz, dead ox is worth 200 zuz, and the carcass is worth nothing. So down the line, you only on a tum ox show half payment damage, which is 100 zuz. So now after the third victim gets damaged, now Kevin owes him 50 zuz because he's a 50% shareholder, and we owe Gavin and I 25 zuz each, which is a dinar. So basically, in that particular case, Gavin and I are 25% shareholders, 12.5% shareholders each. Sorry, guys. Arthur's a 50% shareholder, right in the ox. Then Kevin is a 25% shareholder, and Gavin and I are 12.5% shareholders each. That's why we're giving 25 dinars. Does that make sense? So we're talking about this particular case. So this part of the Mishnah by Rabbi Shimon is explaining a Mishnah in 90a, and it says, right, this is going to answer the question that Rav Tuvia Bar Nasa had about Rav Yosef and how he judged the case of somebody that boxed another Jew in the ears. And he said, are you talking here about a provincial seller or Tyrian seller? And he was saying that the answer lies in our particular Mishnah, because Rav Yosef develops his proof. How does it develop its proof for our Mishnah? Now, if it should enter your mind that the Mishnah generally propounds teaching concerning the provincial seller, then let us go and teach the further distinctions that accrue when the ox gores yet again, up to the point at which shares of the owner and the first victim are reduced to 12 dinar and a provincial seller, which is 12.5 dinarim. The fact that the Mishnah refrains from doing so demonstrates that the Tanaim of the Mishnah do not generally deal with the denominations of the provincial seller. Perforce, when the Mishnah obligates one who strikes another on the ear to pay a seller, it refers to more valuable Tyrian seller. So what this Gemara is actually saying, very simple, is when it took the daf from Rabbi Shimon, all it said was the following, Gavin. It said you had the original owner and the victim, okay? And the original owner damages the victim. Your ox is worth 200, so I get 100, you get 100. It then damages the first victim. He gets 100 because his 200 zuz dead ox is owed 100. I pay 50 and Gavin pays 50. Then it goes down the line. First victim, so that's the second victim being Kevin. I'm the first victim. Arthur's the third victim. And in that particular case, Arthur gets his 100 zuz, 50 from Kevin, who is a 50% shareholder. That's why Kevin gives him 50 zuz. Kevin is now a 25% shareholder, and we must give 25 dinar each. Okay, myself and Gavin. So the evidence here that Rav Yosef says is this is proving it's actually a Tyrian seller. Why? Because it doesn't mention the Mishnah 12.5 dinars. And because it doesn't mention 12.5 dinars, it can't be dealing with provincial currency. He's saying the very proof that it doesn't go into 12.5 dinars means that it does, otherwise it wouldn't mention the term a seller, because the half dinar is a provincial seller. Does that make sense? It would use as a currency. So that's his proof that from our Gemara, we're only dealing with Tyrian sellers and not provincial sellers. So, guys, that proof doesn't work. Do you remember why? From Du Chazorah. Quickly. Do you remember why that proof doesn't work? Gav?
No.
All right, so listen, this is why the proof doesn't work. Because the Gemara is going to turn around and say, look, after you've shown how the shared dispensation works as partners, we don't have to hack this issue to death. In other words, we've discussed a third goring. In the beginning, when you look at Rabbi Meir, it says if it's a tam oxen, it goes 4 or 5 times. But once you've shown the principle once, twice, 3 times, and show how the shareholdings get refracted according to shareholdings of partners, you don't have to give a fourth example to explain how it works. The third example suffices. From 100% owner, then a 50% owner, then a 25% owner, then a 12.5% owner. But even at the 12.5% owner, it's still 25 dinars. We're not talking now about further down the line in that, because we've already taught the principle. So that's not a proof at all. We're just saying that the Gemara doesn't do it, not because it's not dealing with the provincial seller, but merely because it doesn't get to that ridiculous currency. How many times do you have to show that same example? That's what the Gemara is basically saying. And the reason it's saying is Rav Yosef proof is rejected. Rav Tuvia bar Masna said to Rav Yosef, must the Tana of the Mishnah then go on enumerating cases like a peddler counting out coins? Perhaps the Mishnah would deal with provincial currency where necessary. Here, however, it's not necessary to do so, for the Mishnah has already demonstrated the division of damages for the first 3 times the ox gores, and we may extrapolate from there all further gorings and the principles thereof. So there's nothing new to be gained by teaching a fourth goring. Hence, our Mishnah does not constitute proof that when Tanaim of the Mishnah speak of a seller, they invariably mean a Tyrian seller. So the Gemara inquires, well, what was the conclusion regarding this matter? In other words, what does Rav Tuvia bar Masna and Rav Yosef conclude? The conclusion of the argument is resolved from a question which Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Any specified amount of silver, kesef, not silver-plated, guys, or silver alloy, because a provincial currency is silver alloy, but a Tyrian currency is pure silver. So anything dealing with a silver mentioned in the Torah is pure silver in the Tyrian currency. So anything derisa that you have to pay for is paid with pure silver amounts of a Tyrian currency. Anything that is rabbinic in legislation is actually paid for with a provincial currency. Okay, the silver alloy. So Rav Yosef ruled accordingly in the case that had come before him. So the Gemara recounts what has transpired. Upon hearing this ruling, this man who was struck said to Rav Yosef, since my payment is only half a zuz, the equivalent of a provincial seller, I don't want it. Give it to the poor. So that's exactly the proof, guys, is if it was substantial and we were talking about a Tyrian seller, which was worth 8 times as much, why would he say, I'm not interested in those tiny trinkets? Give it to the poor. He wouldn't say that if it was worth 8 times the money. That's exactly the proof. So this is a rabbinical issue, and therefore it's paid in a provincial seller, and that's the proof of his comment. This man that was paid out for his ear boxing. So he said, give it to the poor. I don't need those coins. Afterwards, he said to Rav Yosef, you know what? Give it to me. I will go and refresh myself with it. He was probably thinking, guys, that since he got boxed in the ear, he might as well buy himself a burger and chips or something, something. It might not be tens of thousands of rand, but maybe a meal out. So Rav Yosef said to him, it's too late. The poor have already acquired the money. For although there's no poor people here to effect an acquisition, we are the hands of the poor. What did it mean? It meant Rav Yosef was a trustee on the communal charity fund. So it doesn't mean that the transfer to the poor had actually taken place. But when a commitment had been made, as Rav Yosef said, it has to go now to the poor people. Even if the transaction hasn't taken place, you said give it to the poor, we're giving it to the poor. So regarding a similar matter, incidentally, guys, they bring this case in the Gemara that the person that realized his money was being given to the poor, the Gemara makes a specific note that he had no regrets. He was happy to do it. When they said to him, you can't take the money back. And they said, okay. He said, I'm happy to give it to the poor. Just, I suppose, after having his ear boxed, he figured he might as well go out for a bit of a lunch, even though he couldn't buy a car with the money. We learn a similar case from Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, because we're dealing here with a trustee of communal charity fund. So on this topic of charity, we're learning from Rav Yehuda, who said in the name of Shmuel regarding orphans. Orphans don't need a prosbul. Okay, so just to remind you guys, a prosbul is a document that circumvents the cancellation of debts in the Shemitah year. By allowing the courts to collect on debts. Because what happened is a prosbul is a document which a creditor submits his loan documents to the court for collection. Because what happens is if an individual borrows money from you, you have to forgive that debt. But courts are entitled to collect debts, even during the Shemitah year. And the reason why the rabbis instituted it wasn't to protect those that are giving out loans. It's to ensure that the poor were still given loans, because months before the Shemitah year or a year before, people didn't want to give money of big amounts because they'd never get it back. Not everybody can just write with money. So this is in Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 9. That's where it discusses it. So it doesn't. So as far as that's concerned, anybody that's an orphan doesn't need a prosbul. The court will already. He doesn't need a document saying that the court will collect on his behalf. It's automatic for an orphan because the court takes care of the orphans and the poor.
That's for me, Damon.
Cheers. I've got to go. Thanks, Damon. Cheers, thanks,
Cheers.
Good.
Okay. So the court takes care of the poor. So we don't actually need. It's a default position. We don't actually need that sort of document. Just as the court acts on behalf of the orphans without their knowledge, so too does the trustee of a charity fund act on behalf of the poor without their knowledge. And so did Rami Bar Chanina teach in a brisa, orphans do not need a prosbul. For Ramban Gamliel and his court were the patrons of the orphans. So it mentions Ramban ben Gamliel because he was a very prestigious judge, and his court was held his court was held in high esteem. So that's why he was mentioned. And also he was a judge at the time when the Gemara was discussed. Okay. So we're going to end off on a funny note. Guys, could you do with a laugh? Arthur and I laughed when we heard this. Arthur, are you there? Okay. So this particular part was it shouldn't have been amusing, but I actually found this quite funny. So the Gemara cites another incident involving the Hafzuz penalty exacted from one who strikes an ear of another. Hanan the wicked delivered a blow to the ear of a certain person. The case came before Rav Huna. He said to Hanan the wicked, go give the victim half a zuz for his humiliation. Hanan had in his possession a worn-out zuz, from which he wished to give the victim half zuz. However, he was unable to change the zuz for half zuzim. Why? Because it was so worn out that nobody wanted to accept a half worn out coin. So instead of feeling, and it just shows you how wicked this Hanan the wicked was, because if we're talking
frozen
about
stuff,
a provincial,
frozen.
Who's talking?
Stephen, he's gone now.
Okay.
Just put him on mute, though. Just put him on mute. It's coming from him.
Okay. So what happened is now, Gavin, what's so funny about this is you're talking about a provincial seller. You're talking about a tiny worth, 1/8 of the worth of a Turian seller. And it was like giving the equivalent of like, whatever it was. It was a tiny currency. Boxed this guy in the ear, and he didn't want to lose half his money. And he was this coin was so worn out, he wasn't going to get any shopkeeper to give him the money back. So instead of grudgingly giving this guy double the value, what happened was he punched the guy in the other ear so that he'd get proper value for money. And he gave the eroded coin as compensation for both blows.
Yeah, no, I saw that when I read that. Yeah, no, that I remember. That was excellent.
So that was very funny. All right.
No, excellent.
So listen,
thank you for reminding me about that.
Yeah, we're done. Stephen, we'll come to your shiur Bli Neder tonight for 10 minutes.
For 10 minutes, yeah.
All right, guys.
Stephen, cheers, guys.
I don't know where Arthur is.
He was there 2 minutes ago. There he is.
All right.
Right, Damon, thank you so much.
Listen, we went through a lot. We didn't need a lot of detail here. I hope you didn't mind. I don't want to go through each and every piece of detail. It wasn't necessary. You get the gist.
100%.
All right. Cool. So we finished that, and we're on this 37th daf. Go achieve.